Hello, welcome to One of Nine. I'm Maria Jones and I'm really pleased to introduce to you today Patricia. And Patricia is married to Liam and they have moved from South Africa to England and are living here with Patricia's identical twin sister and their three gorgeous children. So thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.
I heard you saying to one of the mums when she had twins, like some hints and tips of like how you felt, things to look out for. Thank you, sweet lady.
Good.
How was it being a twin?
It didn't occur to me that we were anything unusual. I didn't feel any different.
Can I go upstairs to get some clips?
Quickly.
Or can I have that one?
A hair clip.
I might need that.
But to me, we were no different. That's why I hated the whole twin enigma. It was, to me, we were nothing special. We were just sisters. She was telling me about her class, I was telling her about mine. Well, this is fun, let's see what each other's classes are like. So we decided we were going to swap classes. And I told her where I sat and where she sat and where we stood in line and everything. And we did this. Apparently, I don't remember this, we did it at a time when she was missing her two front teeth and I wasn't. So we didn't think it through properly. But I was sitting in her classroom, thing was going fine, and then my teacher came through the door dragging her with him and said, "They've swapped classes." We had to go back to our original classes and we didn't try that again. We went to the same school, had the same friends, we were so together all the time. We actually fought a lot. I think it used to drive my mother nuts. We fought so much. And my grandmother had this idea in her head before she had twin grandchildren, that twins were always the best of friends and just loved each other and got on like, sunshine and roses, and it was not the case. So only when we got older that we sort of actually began to relate to each other more as friends. And actually got on better, especially when we got our separate bedrooms and just sit and have a discussion instead of like normal kids. Like everyone's kids, their siblings will often just start fighting, and we were no different. She's just completely different. And even her hairstyle, she will not wear a hair clip. I will. Very different tastes, interests.
And then you've managed to move from South Africa to England and live together.
Well, it wasn't planned that way. Liam and I were living on our own. We were renting a place, and then when he was made redundant, when I was pregnant with Edie, we had a really hard time. We felt like we were surfing the crest of a wave, and it just all sort of came crashing down. And it was at the height of the recession that started in 2008. A long time to find a job again, and we were just draining savings trying to pay rent. So we decided, right, let's just take a step, back in order to move a step forward later. And we moved in with her. And we thought, well, what we'll do is we'll save up, live with her, use the time to save up so we don't have to pay rent at the same time.
Why did you move from South Africa to England? But you're mostly English.
Yeah.
So how did your family end up in South Africa?
My grandparents were here during the war. My grandmother worked for the Ministry of Food in Spennymoor, where they came from. My grandfather's family had a butchery, and they got married just after the war ended. He was in the RAF. And then he went back to working for his father in the butchery, but they weren't earning very much. He always said I think he said if he'd earned 4 shillings a week more, he would never have left England. But the South African Air Force was recruiting ex-RAF members. And they arrived in Cape Town, had to take the train up to Pretoria, do 5 years contract in the South African Air Force. But it became very, the contract they had agreed, there was supposed to be a lot of perks for them, which never came through. Because by the time they arrived, they had the South African elections, and there was the National Party in power who were very, very anti-English because of the Boer War. They still had a chip on their shoulders. So my grandfather just served out the term of his contract, went up to Northern Rhodesia, which is now Zambia. They stayed there for 20-something years, which is when my mother was born. And they had the Zambian nationalisation programme, which basically meant my grandfather's business as a butcher. He wasn't allowed to continue, so they had the choice to face either go back down to South Africa or to England. My grandmother didn't want to come back to England with her tail between her legs looking like the failure, so they went back down to South Africa. That's sort of how we all ended up staying there and being born there. My parents went to university, my mother's and her siblings went to university there, and that's where my parents met and married, and we were born there. So it's a long journey from 1948 to when we were born, but it's a lot of moving around.
Did you feel South African?
I felt like I was, but a lot of people would ask me where I was from, especially as I got older. I just was perplexed. It's like, you're born and brought up here. But obviously I looked very pale. I learned quite early on that I don't tan. I go from white to burnt red. So I just stopped trying. So I think I looked very pale, and I think I had definitely have an African accent, but I think it's more like my mother's, more of a Rhodesian accent.
You speak very quickly, Patricia. Is that a South African thing?
No, it's me. It's me. I feel like I speak perfectly normally, but I have heard that. I speak too quickly.
Were you immersed much in the Catholic culture in South Africa?
Apartheid government's policy was to keep Catholic numbers stable and not to allow them to grow. We were very anti-Catholic. We were called, it's in Afrikaans, the Roomse gevaar, the Roman danger. There were the three dangers: the Rooi gevaar, which is the red danger, the communists; the Roomse gevaar, which is the Roman Catholic danger; and the Swart gevaar, which is the black danger, the black population. Those were the three dangers they were worried about. So if you were a black Catholic, you were really unpopular. A lot of our priests there now are black, because they would have been in the seminaries. The intention in every mission country is to grow the native population of Catholics and clergy. They didn't like missionary activity. They believed, it's so Calvinistic. My mother worked with a woman who was the dominie, which is like the minister. She was his wife. Mm-hmm. And she walked into the office of my mother's Polish friend who had a picture of Our Lady of Jasnogora, the Black Madonna, and she actually started shaking with rage when she saw that picture. I had another friend whose father was a dominie, and he used to listen to Classic FM, but even if they sang Ave Maria on Classic FM, he would switch it off. I think some of them have chilled out a bit, but there was a real anti-Catholic bias.
What was it?
When the Pope John Paul II went to Lesotho on a pastoral visit, a lot of Catholic South Africans, this was in the 80s, a lot of Catholic South Africans went there, obviously to see him. And we was a write-up by the Dutch Reformed Church in the newspaper telling us how unbiblical and it is to go and see the Pope, and it's idolatrous and all this sort of thing. They were very anti-Catholic. Even my secondary school history curriculum, first year, I remember year 8, which is first year in secondary there, there's a lot of the history curriculum it's quite anti-Catholic, about the Reformation and all the evils of the Catholic Church and all that, which was quite hard for me to hear because I'd never heard it before. It was hard for me to also relate that to what I experienced as a Catholic. And in a sense, there is a Catholic community there. There's a lot of Portuguese Catholics, Italian Catholics. We were some of the few English Catholics. There is a growing native population of Catholics there as well. Go to the Voortrekker Monument, which is, you know where the word trek comes from? It means a journey, and the Voortrekkers were the forward journey. They're the ones who left the Cape Colony when it became British. The British outlawed slavery. As you know, the British Empire, William Wilberforce, not just outlawed, as in you weren't allowed to trade slaves, you weren't allowed to even have slaves. So a lot of people have the theory that was the reason they wanted to leave. They didn't want to live under English control. They wanted their independence. They travelled in their ox wagons north. It's around about the same time the American expansion to the west, so it's quite interesting, that point of history. There was a lot of sort of expansion via ox wagon. But they travelled north and they had separate Boer republics.
What republics?
Boer is, in England you say Boer. We say, in Afrikaans it's pronounced Boer. In England you tend to say Boer or Boer. It's a very different pronunciation, but it means farmer. Mm-hmm. But they were all basically farmers. Not many banks to work in, and in the bare bushveld. So they were all farmers, travelled in their ox wagons, and hats off to them. It was, dangerous territory to go through. That's when they had a lot of the wars with the Zulu. At the same time as Shaka Zulu was king of the Zulus. He's often called the Napoleon of Africa. The damage he caused, the displacement of people, and there was quite a lot of violence, and they had to go through this. And a lot of them, the fur trackers, would actually form what they called a lager, put their ox wagons in a circle, put thorn tree branches and things around them, put the women and children there to keep them safe, so they could fire the guns and things from the invading, approaching Zulu army. So they travelled up north and founded these Boer republics. And the Transvaal, they later became, after the Boer War, and which Britain ultimately won, they became the 4 provinces of South Africa. There are now 10 provinces. The ANC's changed all that. But in the Transvaal, which is a Boer republic, an Afrikaans republic, it was illegal to be Catholic. The first church was built there, our cathedral, in 1910, after the Boer War. The second church was my parish, St. Columba's. It was built by a lot of Irish Catholics who came in with the gold rush. When I last lived in South Africa, I was a catechist there for 8 years. And that's probably where I experienced my greatest growth of faith. I remember going there as a child, going to Mass, and I just had this awareness of God being in there. We weren't a particularly religious family. My parents just did my mother used to take us to Mass. My father would often not come with us. Mm-hmm. And I just remember sitting in there just talking to God, saying, I promise no matter what, I will always try to love you. And I've always felt like, even though I was a child, I need to keep true to that promise. So even when I had times when I've sort of, lagged a bit and not made much effort with my faith, I really remember I had made that promise. I have to keep it. So it does feel strange to think that I made that as a child, but I knew what I was talking about. As a child, I had that sense, this is real, this is true. Even though I didn't know much about it, I learnt a lot later when I went back to that parish. For a while we were in another parish, St. John the Baptist parish, and then we went back there and I started becoming a catechist, and that's when I actually had to start learning, because I had to teach. And I realised I didn't know much. I started reading a lot, and
what age were you when you became a catechist?
I was 19.
So you were living at home, maybe you'd done some studies, or you finished school, had you?
Yeah, I finished school. I was still studying. I went to university. I was doing a lot of ancient history, which intrigued me as well, that especially the ancient Near East. And you see the Jew. It's amazing, because the Hebrews, as they were then, were just one tribe among many ancient tribes. But you don't hear about the Assyrians or the Hittites or anyone before him now. Even the ancient Egyptians are not the Egyptians of today. All of that's gone. The only thing that survived from that era is the Jews and the Jewish faith. It's like there's something there that kept them going through those millennia, the centuries. There's something there that's, they don't hear about those old religions and those other tribes. They've all either been Christianized or replaced by other religions, Zoroastrianism and all that. Islam as well, which spread in that region. When we went back to that parish and started teaching, it was under the influence of a priest, Father Keith. And he was a convert as well. He only became a priest in his late 50s. But he is the most amazing preacher. He used to draw, we went to the Novus Ordo Mass in those days, but what he did really well was, because he was also a historian, he used to draw out the links between the Old Testament readings and the New Testament readings and put it in a lot of context. And I learned so much from that, and it made me interested and want to learn more. Often after Mass, he would sort of give a second sermon talking about relevant, contemporary things, like talking about them. Da Vinci Code came out. And he's talking a lot about that and saying people say the crucifixion didn't happen for this reason and that reason. And he'd say, well, it's very simple. They just hidden Jesus' body. Well, it would have been very simple for the Pharisees or whatever to point out, look, we've got the body now. Or 12 men are not going to all go to their death protecting a lie. It just proved to me how rational our faith is. People think faith and reason are opposite. These are very closely intertwined in being Catholic. My grandmother was sort of always trying to teach us our prayers. I saw her praying her rosary every day. She wore her rosary out. We had to get her another one. She broke it. They had their papal, we used to call them, my uncle jokingly used to call them the guarantees, but they're the plenary indulgences from Pope Paul VI. They're a friend of theirs, an Italian priest when they were in Zambia, got them for them, and it was just, my grandparents are really, really faithful. And I think because both my parents were working, my grandparents probably had more of a formative effect on us because we stayed with them so much. They were looking after us so much. And my grandfather was a convert. He was Methodist when they got married, and he converted 14 years later.
And I think that's really powerful to hear as well, the influence of the grandparents, because lots of grandparents that are watching and they look after their grandchildren, and sometimes there is that worry if maybe the children haven't carried on the faith.
Well, my grandfather said, they really struggled. At one point they were in Zambia, he started a new job, he was an insurance salesman, he got a map of the town, a grid layout, go from door to door knocking. He wouldn't eat during the day at that time to make sure my grandmother had enough food. They couldn't afford for both of them to eat. But he said when you've started a new job, you don't know whether, you had to basically work on commission, and you've got 4 children to support, and you don't know where the money's going to come from. He said that's when you learn to pray. And he also, when they lost, he eventually became quite successful at that, and then he left to start a butchery because he was a butcher. And then when they lost all of that, when my grandparents were 52 or 53 years old, they lost everything in Zambia. They had to start again in South Africa. And my grandfather always said he felt like St. Joseph going down to Egypt with Mary and baby Jesus. You have to go down to a foreign land. He hadn't been there for 20-something years. And start all over again, and you have a family to support and you're not sure how you're going to do it. He always said he knew what St. Joseph felt like going to Egypt. So I think a lot of that resonated with him, and he explained it to us. And just his simple fidelity, he was completely unmaterialistic. He was an incredible man. One of his friends at his funeral described him as a curbside philosopher. He'd just sit in his lounge and say, "This is nice." Just so happy with what he had. He was just so pleased with it, and I think it's a great example. And sometimes I have to look around and look at things I have and this is actually quite nice, and you just stop wishing for other things. My grandparents to me were like a united team and pulled through all of this difficulty together, and they had some incredibly difficult times. But it was a lovely example to the rest of us of marriage. They were married for about 63 years when she died, and he was devastated. But it's just they had that incredible influence on us. The books they had in their house, not a lot of religious books, but there's an incredible Bible which is behind Peter there. I used to look through. He bought it for her on the year he converted. It's a family Bible.
He's a convert.
Yeah, he converted in 1960 when they'd been married 14 years.
Grandmother was Catholic to start with?
Yes, down to her very bones. And he converted, and then he bought her that Bible, which they passed on to us, because I think we're the only grandchildren of theirs which really practice their faith, my sister and I. And I used to just sit at their house, there's a Catholic dictionary in the back of their Bible, and just going through that, I learned so much. The definitions and the meanings of things, and the few books they had. The one book I remember reading, Faith of Millions, by John A. O'Brien, I still remember his name. I learned so much from that. That's at the time when I was starting as a catechist. Kind of looking at it now, there's just a few influences all sort of joined together to make sure, and I still feel like I've got a long way to go.
And it's almost like that analogy that it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
And again, another story of raising our children in the faith. Like, we're not completely alone, are we? We do have, your mum and dad had your mum's parents to influence you. And there are those influences around, and that importance of community. You always want your children to be surrounded by the faith, or by people that are living the faith, because that is the most powerful example for them.
Well, I think especially nowadays when there's so many counter-examples which are actually actively bad for them, and that seems so seductive. I'm thinking, listening to this Bible in a Year podcast, you see how ancient Israel was surrounded by all these tribes and lands of people and nations who were so different from them, and it's always the temptation to become like that. That's why God sort of had to give them a hard time and call them back to him. And I think our lives are a bit like that. We have to sort of, in a sense, seal your children to properly imbue that faith, so they're not, in a sense, tempted to become like that, so that when they do someday meet those people, their faith is strong enough so that they can influence them rather than the other way around. Because when we grew up, even though it was very anti-Catholic, it was still at least very Christian culture. And the one thing we did learn very well at school, we were taught the Bible. So we were taught a lot of Bible stories. That's not going to happen in England. They do not teach Bible stories in state schools.
Why did you come to England? Did you feel like a drawback to sort of your roots?
I did. I always knew. South Africa is also a very violent country. I knew I didn't want to bring children up there. There is a lot of violence. It's a really scary way to live. When I first came to England, I just walked around and I thought, what's wrong with these people? They don't have burglar bars and security gates and electric fences and vicious dogs. And also I already had some extended family here, some aunts and uncles and cousins. So it's not as though we were going to be completely isolated.
And did you come with Colleen, your twin sister?
Yeah, we were sharing a house. We were renting in Pretoria. And then we had to wait for her dog to die. She wouldn't leave without her dog. And then when she did die, then we started making preparations. We were both I'd finished studying then, her dog had died, so we were ready to apply for our visas and come over. The other, oh, look at you!
Wow!
Rainbow.
That's
Rainbow
so
cake and a
beautiful.
rainbow face.
Wow, Jemima.
Who did that?
So pretty.
Donnie.
So you and Colleen, a bit competitive maybe. Were you both sort of zapped by the faith at the same time, or?
I always felt like I was trying to be more religious than her, but then I noticed later she was trying to catch up. I think because we both had that influence, we both became catechists at the same time, and then we started sharing things. We used to read the same books. We both did become quite interested in apologetics, mostly apologetics at first, a lot of the history as well, because we were attacked a lot on our history. My whole Year 8 curriculum, or at least half of it, was about how bad Catholics were, and I had no idea what to say. I was just sitting there trying to slink and disappear under the table at school, thinking. And I think a lot of the peers I was at school with still believe that. And so Colleen and I did, in a sense, help each other to develop and grow and share that. And we also had a lot of friends around us who were quite anti-Catholic and used to tease us in a mocking way, but we used to kind of want to be able to answer them. And we did have, she had the one friend she met at university whose father was a Dutch Reformed minister. He's the one who, when the radio was playing Ave Maria, would switch it off. And he wrote us this whole long tract about anti-Catholic and giving us quotes from the Bible, and we wrote him a long reply to that, and he never replied to that again. He gave it to a theology professor at the university who has never replied to us either. We also realised that we had been badly catechized. But my parents' generation, my mother especially, and that caused a lot of damage to that whole generation, because they were taught God is this hellfire and brimstone judge just waiting for you to put a foot wrong. And whereas we got the complete opposite, we got Jesus as a hippie. So I thought that there's some sort of balance to be had here. So we got very lackluster, weak, watered down catechesis. I'd never heard of things like a novena or an indulgence or any of these things before. And then I had to start learning about it. To me, it's so much of our heritage that we lost, that a lot of that was thrown out. And I had to start learning about that again. We actually wrote a catechism syllabus for the confirmation. So it's a bit like America in South Africa. You have to go for catechism lessons every week on a Sunday for the term time, from the time you start school to the time you get confirmed when you're 16 or 17. So it's a lot more catechesis than they have in England, which surprised me when I came here. I thought you only have to go for catechism lesson when you're ready for that sacrament here, which to me was like, that's not very much, but better than nothing, I suppose. I think they assume the parents are going to teach them, which you should be able to assume, but nowadays you can't.
Maybe there's some sort of confusion with who's teaching who. I think when we went to school, my mum thought that we were getting that from the Catholic school. And lots of it we did, but it wasn't like what she'd received. It wasn't as rigorous and thorough. Lani, can you get Jemima Crisp, please?
Look at me, Josie Posey. Oh, you're a tiger.
Here's the baby over here. Oh, that's so sweet.
Evie's got a very maternal streak.
Come on. Yeah, you can do it. Are you fussy about what books they read? Do you sort of like them to read?
I give them the books that I want them to read, the things I think they will enjoy, that will engross them. At the moment, we're in a famous 5 phase with a vengeance. And I think the language in that is beautiful because it was written in the 40s and 50s, I think some in the 60s, when people spoke with much greater vocabulary. Being immersed in that, being immersed in good literature and reading and just keeping them away from all technology so it's not a temptation. And then they're bored out of their skulls, they read, and then they actually wanted to read more and more. So as I was an English teacher, I'm a bit partial to reading as well, and I wanted that for them because it's a wonderful experience to just enjoy a book so much.
When we came in, Lani said to Josie, "Oh, your hair's so silky," and she said, "That's just like one of the characters from the Faraway Tree, Silky the Fairy."
Yes, I read that to them years ago, and then they also, or to Edie. I think Josie just heard bits of it because she'd fall asleep in the evening when I was reading it to Edie, and then I have got them to listen to a little bit of the audiobook, which is all on YouTube, a lot of the audiobooks of these things.
Yes, we've been listening to the Enchanted Tree series on YouTube.
Yeah, they absolutely love that. The characters and the imagination, and it's just incredible, that Magic Faraway Tree. The downside is, I'm reading the famous 5, is every now and then Jodie packs herself a backpack, tries to climb over the fence to go to the local farm. because she wants to go on an adventure.
So were there some surprises of being a mum, or was it all you've kind of thought it was going to be?
I think the biggest surprise was that the babyhood is not the hardest. I thought that was hard. I remember I used to go to mass during the week sometimes with Edie, and then I thought, this is the hardest part. Once she starts walking and talking, it'll get easier. And I remember being at mass when she was sort of getting to that stage, and one of the elderly, I was the only young person there with my baby, and a lot of the elderly, they're retired, they've got time to go to mass during the week. One of the elderly women said to me, oh, this is with age where it starts getting difficult. I remember being shocked. I was like, I thought it was difficult. I thought this was getting to the easy part. Don't say that to me. But it is difficult, but in a different way, because you're dealing with someone's character. You're not just feeding them, making sure they sleep and changing nappies. It's starting to deal with an emerging character and having to start disciplining them and starting to, in a very basic way, teaching them right from wrong. So that is the hard part. It's also lovely because you see the emerging character, but sometimes the emerging character is incredibly stubborn and likes to just play with everything in your cupboard and doesn't see why they shouldn't strew everything around the place, including oats like it's confetti.
We go on that journey. For anybody that's watching that might be thinking, oh, I'm having my first and I thought this was quite hard. But we are taken on that route that is, tried and tested, and, you see big families and you think, well, if they can do it, they can do it. And I think it's almost like, you look back and say, oh, it was easy. It's so easy to crawl, but you need to crawl to learn to walk, to learn to, to move around. So it comes at the right time.
But I also think for the first child, that is very true. I remember your mother saying to me, and she having had 9 children, I thought very much valued her opinion on this subject. I think she had very vivid memories of having her first. Saying to me, oh, the first one is so hard. It's like she was so scarred by it still. Oh. But she was right. The first one is the hardest because it's a baptism of fire. Nothing can prepare you for that. The intense love, but the also intense, some very difficult things you weren't prepared for. Someone so little is so dependent on you, like for every waking minute almost. But that does get easier because with most things in life, experience counts for an awful lot. So second and third were much easier. It's a lot less stressful as you go along. The older ones do set examples for the younger ones and sometimes try to discipline them themselves because Edie has a very maternal streak in her and she's like, no, you're not to do that. Mummy won't let you. It's like, okay, Edie, that's not your role because I don't want her to feel like she can henpeck the others. She still needs to see herself as one of the children, not one of the adults. But it is funny that she sort of will do that. She's trying to teach them right from wrong as well because she's learnt it.
Yeah, we have this in our house, and I try and say to the children, your job is just to be lovely to each other and just to get a really good relationship and not disappoint.
Yeah, you can remind each other of the rules, but you're not to enforce them. That's basically what we say. Yeah. And also just getting them to speak to each other kindly and, using words rather than, fists. To, when you cross to someone's taking your toy, don't punch them or something, come and tell me. Ask them first, ask them back nicely. That doesn't work, then come and tell an adult. Because they want their toy or their book back. So then they start hurting each other. I mean, that's
they don't have the words.
Yeah.
So then maybe just you go back to a sort of instinctual, primitive language, which is the body, the body language.
Yeah, so it's teaching in that way of dealing with their problems. It's like it's almost like you need a flow chart. Like, first do this, if that doesn't work, then do this. Last port of call, come to me. So. And then they're still learning that. It's about remembering it as well as doing it. And remembering it is hard for them when you're in that that moment. The instinct just takes over. So it takes a lot of repeating this to them. And then when they do it, oh, well done, you did it. You didn't throw a punch. So yes.
Yeah, that's it. Really going with it on the good times and praising them and saying, oh, look how lovely you're playing together because you're such good brothers and sisters, or whatever it is, how lovely you've got your brother, and point out all the lovely things between them because they're a mini society, aren't they, the little children together.
Well, I did read that once somewhere. Children having brothers and sisters is the best preparation for marriage. Because it teaches you don't always get your own way. You have to compromise, you have to learn to get along. Sometimes when they fight, I think it's horrible they're fighting, but it's actually good because they're learning to have that bit of friction and realise you can't always get your own way. You have to negotiate, and someone has to give one time, and sometimes someone else will have to give. So they do learn to sort of negotiate and give in a bit.
So you really appreciated your grandparents being part of your upbringing and influence. You've come to England, you're raising a family, or have you, you've sought out community?
You introduced me to some friends, and then we just met more and more and more. And good grief, we're crawling with Catholics, this place. We didn't know that when we first came to England. They were Catholics. We used to go to mass, and I got the impression that they were just sort of there just to tick the boxes for their children, doing First Holy Communion and that sort of thing. It was more after we had children. My older sister said to me, when you have children, you make a lot of friends, and that is, she was not kidding. Because we've all had so much in common, meeting friends, and there are a lot of people who I've met who have children, but they're not Catholic, and I have struggled with that because you don't really have those deep conversations and, you know, the same morals for your children, and a lot of them, like the parents are not married and like that, and, you know, it's really hard for me to sort of say to my children, yes, well, that's wrong, they're nice people, but that's wrong, and they should have been married, or they're all sinners. But I'm very aware of what the sort of worldview I want my children to have, or what is good and holy, and I sort of want them to have the experience of families and a community with that, and I think we have very much created that, especially up this part of England where we are, especially with the Regina Caeli Academy. I think the families there just become so close-knit, and it's wonderful to know that when your children are at school, I don't have to worry about what sort of values are being imparted to them, and even the other parents always worry about when they go to a birthday party or something. I'm not worried about what, you know, because I know that parents share my values. They're not going to, when they're teenagers, they're not going to leave them alone and let the boys and girls do what they want. They'll be keeping a beady eye on them because they share our Catholic values. So that has been great in a sense. It was almost sent to us. That was just like a wonderful surprise. We tend to go to Mass at Blackfriars in Cambridge. Yeah, it's the Dominicans. They're very good, very faithful. They have the Latin Rite Mass there. It's also a great community there. Obviously a lot of people are linked to Cambridge, so you get a lot of very learned people there, and there's a friend of mine who's teaching my children Latin and Greek. She's doing it because she wants to help raise up some biblical scholars for the church's future, and to have that community is just priceless. It's not something we sought, it's something that just came to us, and it was wonderful to have that sort of pleasant surprise. You always worry about, you know, new chapters and moving to be somewhere else, and somehow it works out. You know, we're always sort of there for each other somehow, even if it's just connected via WhatsApp. So that has been such a support.
So in terms of the community, like you just touched on there, about your recent sadness, will you share a bit more with us about that?
We were expecting a baby. We've been trying for a while for a baby, and much to our surprise, we conceived in January, and then was very excited about it, but worried because we have had 2 miscarriages before that. And then we got to the 12-week mark, and we went for a scan, and at the scan they told us there were some anomalies. They wouldn't tell us what they were, and that we were being referred to the fetal medicine unit. And then they took us up there, and they said they wouldn't see us. We had to wait 2 weeks because the baby was too small to actually see anything properly. And then we had to wait 2 weeks in absolute agony. What we were told was that they couldn't get a proper image of the brain. There might be some fluid on the brain. The intestines were still protruding, which they should have gone in by then. And I think the baby was a bit small for its age, which wasn't the biggest worry. And also that the baby was not really moving. The arms are moving, but I couldn't see much else moving. So we waited for 2 weeks, and we were just... That's when I WhatsApped everyone and said, please pray for me. And there's a few people, I had some friends who met with me, went to Mass in Cornwall, got them to pray for me, asked them to get the nuns there to pray for me, the Carmelite community there. They had asked the Dominican nuns in Cambridge if they would pray for me. I think Liam and I both felt the communion of saints then, and just all the prayer. It was a really hard time, very sad, a lot of crying, but it just sort of felt like we had to accept whatever it was. But sadly, when we went to the scan again to see the consultant on the Monday, they said our baby's heartbeat had stopped. So the next step then was how to deliver the baby, because I hadn't yet started to miscarry naturally. So they said I could wait for that, in which case it could take a very long time, and there were risks such as septicemia and retention of, you know, parts of the placenta of the baby. So we decided I didn't want the risk of having a natural miscarriage, and also just part of me just wanted it complete. I wanted some closure. I didn't know how I'd react emotionally, but I just wanted a little body, to give that little body that little dignity of having a body to you know, bury. So they were really good with us at the hospital, and they were very considerate and kind. And so I was very lucky. I had a really relatively painless delivery. It took just over an hour from the time they inserted the tablets. Can go on all night and be like labour, but I'm very, very glad I didn't experience that. I'm very lucky I didn't experience that. A friend of mine in Cornwall said she thinks Our Lady had her mantle around me. So I think some people are called to suffer through that for whatever reason, offer their sufferings up. But I was very lucky about that. And then we had our little baby, and had time to just hold the little body look at our little one, just so 12 weeks, so tiny but so perfectly formed, just like lying there. And at least it was, I thought I would be more upset than I was, but to me it was like closure. I got a chance to grieve and to say goodbye and to speak to my baby, and also knowing that there's this little body, someone we could give the dignity of a burial to. So, and we just did that recently, a few days ago. We had one of the Dominican fathers come out and conduct the burial service. In the rainbow face. And started happening in Holy Week, and that was one of my good friends from our lovely Catholic community did send me some lovely prayers of consecration of a baby to Our Lady, which I prayed over and over again. So it was lovely feeling that to me, that it wasn't answered in the way I wanted it to be, but it was answered. That baby is now consecrated to Mary, and I always think little baby Charlie is with her now. I've got a statue in the kitchen windowsill of Mary holding baby Jesus, but I always think that's my baby now. She's holding my baby. Audrey.
So you named your baby?
Therese Charles, because we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. They couldn't tell. There wasn't enough fetal material in the placenta sample they took. So we're going to name her baby Therese if a girl and Charles if a boy. After all, Saint Teresa, we had asked for special intercession from Saint Teresa of Calcutta, and she took her name from Therese of Lisieux, so we thought of Therese. And Charles came from Karol Wojtyła, Pope John Paul II, and Carlo Acutus, whose intercession we asked for. So we put that into the anglicised it to Charles.
And did you share this with your children as little Therese Charlie?
Yeah, we didn't tell them until we came back from the first scan, because I was hoping to tell them and get excited, new baby on the way. I had to tell them, and they were so giddy with excitement, but then I had to sort of sit them down and say, calm down. The baby might be very sick, maybe might, be really, really quite ill and not be able to move, or even things like that. We don't know what's wrong with the baby. And they said, oh, that's very sad. But then they were still jumping around with excitement because it's a baby. It was really hard 2 weeks later to sit them down and tell them that the baby had died. And Edie was happy because she knows, well, the baby's in heaven. The baby's fine. The baby's in heaven now. Josie took it harder because she wanted a new playmate. She was excited having a new little friend, little brother or sister to play with. Especially because she was convinced when Edie turned 8, she would no longer want to play with her. She'd be too mature. So that hasn't happened, luckily.
Thanks be to God.
And George was just oblivious. He's got a sword to play with. He was happy. So he was a bit sad, but I don't think it really computes with him as much as it did with the girls, because he's younger. So.
And are you glad that you shared it with the children?
Yes, I think they had to know, because I think it's also because I think they know that if that had been one of them, they saw how much we cried when we lost the baby, and to know that that's out of love, that we would have loved them even if they hadn't made it. That we love our children even if they don't make it into our arms. We love all three of them. They always talk about their three brothers, their three siblings in heaven, Julian, Bernadine, and now Charlie. And I also think going through that as an atheist must be so hard, because we had a really hard time, but at least could sort of think, I'll hold you in heaven. Also, it's said to Liam, we now have an extra incentive to try to get to heaven. So just to see how, half our children are there. But I can't imagine I was trying to imagine going through that thinking, well, that's it, it's just, fetal material, we're just...
And actually today I looked at my diary, and it's the day that we lost our first baby, our little baby Lee.
Yeah.
And we feel like we gained something, and as sad as it was, I'm so grateful that God gave us that baby for the little bit of time we had her.
Sometimes I think, I'm tempted to think, it was all in vain, because I had a very difficult first trimester. I had a lot of migraines. I was feeling sick. I didn't want to eat. I was throwing up a lot. And sometimes I think it wasn't in vain, but then I realised it wasn't in vain, because there's that little soul is alive for all eternity. It's not, that little Charlie's not gone, just in a different place. That's what happens when you love. When you lose that loss, it's because it's not lost from here. You're just sad because you never got to hold that baby, but hopefully I will one day. So it's hard saying goodbye and giving up. It was like that's the excitement of a new baby, that hope of all the, seeing the smiles and the giggles when they're first talking and crawling and pulling all the shoes off the shelf. It's a loss of the physical life, but the little person is still alive. It's just, had we not been open to that and held that life for as long as we could, that would not, it's a little someone standing before God for all eternity with the two other siblings. So yeah. It's. I have to very quickly remind myself this is not in vain. It's the little person still lives and is still loved, even if we don't have that little baby to hold in our arms. The baby's still loved. So by all of us, yeah.
Thank you so much, Patricia. It was just such a pleasure to talk to you and hear your story.
Thank you.
And please comment, email us if you like to. And it's lovely for our guests if you pray for them, pray for Patricia and her family. And if you're enjoying this channel, please consider donating a monthly pledge. Thank you so much. Sorry about the shoes.
It's all right, they're not mine.